Hey everybody, my name is Taylor Glenn and this is my channel Taylor Tries, where I try new things and I try to teach you new things. And today I'm going to teach you how to make a super simple and affordable wall-mounted kendama rack. The great thing about this build is it's really easy to make and it's portable, so you can save all your money for even more great kendamas to put on your wall. Let's take a look at exactly what we're going to be building. The concept is super simple. It's just 3 pieces of wood that are glued together that will be mounted to the wall, and then the kendamas are going to hang over the edge. Really basic, and I'm going to take you through each step along the way. Let's take a look at what you need to buy. The most important pieces you need are the wood pieces. For the version we're making today, you're gonna get pieces of wood that are 2 feet long. Now what's great about this is you can get multiple sets of these pieces so that you can make something that's 4 feet long or 6 feet long, but we're still gonna build it in 2-foot chunks. So you're gonna need a 3/4 inch by 2 foot square. That's just a piece of wood that is 3/4 inches all the way around to create a square, and it's 2 feet long. The next piece you'll need is a 1/4 inch, which is this away, by 2 inches, which is actually 1.5 inches, by again 2 feet. The last piece you'll need is a 1/4 inch again by 3 inches thick. It's actually more like 2.5 by 2 feet. Also keep in mind you can get different types of wood depending on what kind of look you want. I knew that I wanted my back panel to be a nicer piece of wood because I want to stain it and bring out its natural color. So I chose to get a slightly more expensive piece for that back panel. But I want to paint the other 2 pieces, so I got the cheapest options available, which is usually poplar or common boards. Either way, all 3 of these pieces are going to be fairly cheap and run you somewhere between $1 and $5 depending on what kind of wood you get. These in particular are what they call hobby boards, so you can find these in the lumber section, but they're usually in sort of bins at the bottom underneath the long pieces of wood. I know I used to have a hard time finding them, maybe that will help. Again, if you're gonna wanna make more than just this 2-foot section, if you're gonna wanna stack them on top of each other or make it longer, you're gonna wanna multiply this by however long you want it. These 3 pieces will make 1 2-foot rack. We're going to be gluing the wood together, so you're going to want some sort of wood glue. This is the brand I personally use. For this project, you're not going to need very much of it, so just get the smallest bottle you can find. You'll also need 2 clamps so that you can clamp the pieces together as the wood glue is drying. These ones are the slightly fancier ones. You can get really cheap spring clamps that open up to 2 inches, which is all you need, for $1. To mount it to the wall, we're going to need some screws. For just one of these 2-foot kendama racks, you're going to need 2 screws. The screws I used are number 6, 1.5 inch wood screws. Now, technically when you screw something into drywall, you're supposed to use a drywall anchor, but I've personally found that the kendama rack, even with kendamas on it, is still not really heavy enough to cause a problem on my walls. But if you feel really uncomfortable with it, you might also want to get some drywall anchors for those screws as well. Since I am using screws to mount this, I also have a drill. If you don't own a drill, odds are somebody you know does have one. Just borrow one for this project. I also like to pre-drill holes so that I don't end up splitting the wood. So for this, I ended up using a 1/8 inch drill bit. Next, you just gotta think about how you want the rack to look. Do you want it to be painted or do you want it to be stained? Depending on the answers to those questions, you're going to wanna buy the appropriate materials. So for me, I got a really natural looking stain. The simplest option would be just to paint it with some sort of acrylic paint or even spray paint. I personally had some leftover latex paint that I used to paint my room, and I wanted it to match, so I'm using that. If you're gonna be painting or staining your wood, obviously you'll need some paintbrushes. Next, you wanna decide if you want a finish on your kendama rack. This is a completely optional step, and it's just a matter of if you want there to be a shine or you want it to be a little more durable with a little more strength. The finish I'll be using is an oil modified polyurethane. I actually highly recommend you get just the normal water-based polyacrylic finish. It's really easy to use and it looks really good. You can also try using the spray can finish, which I've had some luck with. I don't personally think this looks as good or as durable, but it's a really good option if you just want something simple. I highly recommend you have some sort of level. Again, if you don't have one of these, just borrow one. A lot of people have them in their homes. If you want to create the nice LED look that I have in my rack, then you can also get a light strip. The great thing about this light strip is that it allows me to change the color and the brightness to whatever I want to look extra fancy. But you can get a cheaper one. As long as it's less than 3/4 inch wide, then you should be fine. Lastly, you'll want some sort of rag that you can use to clean off glue, and it will come in handy when we are using the clamps. I know this might look like a lot of stuff, but keep in mind a lot of these things like stains and finishes and paints are all things that you don't really have to do, especially if you're trying to work on a budget. I have links in the description to all of these things so that you know exactly the things that I used, but I highly encourage you to think about how you want your particular rack to look. Now that we have all of our pieces, let's get making stuff. So the first step is figuring out how you want the rack to look. As I said, I want to stain this nice wooden piece, and then I'm going to paint these other two pieces. So before we do any gluing, we're gonna wanna finish those first. If you don't wanna paint or stain your pieces of wood and you just wanna have them look natural the way they were, you can skip this step. Once you're all done painting or staining or whatever you decided to do, you can now finish the wood if you're choosing to put that protective coat on there for some extra shine or protection. If you don't want to do this step, you can completely skip it and you'll be ready to glue. Like I said, I'm going to be using the oil modified water-based polyurethane, and the only piece I'm going to be finishing is this back panel because it's the only one I want to look glossy. I'm going to let this dry, which is going to take about 2 hours, then I'm going to put another coat on, let that dry, and then put another coat on, and that's gonna help me get that really shiny gloss that I'm looking for. This is definitely the most time-intensive part of the entire process, and it's honestly completely optional. If you only wanna put one coat of gloss on there, do that. If you don't wanna put any gloss on there, don't do it. Like I said, you can make this as simple or complex as you want it, and depending on what you choose, it'll change how much time it takes. Once you're done with all 3 of your pieces, however you wanna finish them, we can start doing the fun part, which is assembling it. So you're gonna need your wood glue and your clamps. First, we're gonna glue the square piece to the back panel. So we're just gonna put a little bit of wood glue along the inside of this piece. Then from here, I like to kind of spread it out with my finger. Just try to put enough that it coats the actual face of this piece. Then wipe your hand off, of course. Gross. Then you just place it on the piece. The thing about wood glue is you need to really press it together in order to create a nice strong hold, which is why we're gonna use our clamps. So once you place that piece about where you want it, we're gonna clamp our wood in place. Make sure you clamp it as tightly as possible because you really wanna create a nice strong hold there so it doesn't come apart ever. Once you get it clamped, you can kind of fudge it into place because odds are it repositioned a little bit. You're probably going to want to take a paper towel or some sort of cloth and just wipe any wood glue off that might have come out when you squish them together. Once you get it all in place and you clean up those edges a little bit, just let it sit for about a half hour and then we'll glue on the final piece. All right, after about a half hour, that should be pretty well dry. So you can take off your clamps. Now we're gonna do the exact same thing, but we're gonna be gluing this thinner top layer on the square, just like that. When you do this, I do recommend that you have some sort of towel to put between the clamps and the wood itself, just because when you're clamping with that much pressure on the wood, you might end up getting some indentations. And since this is the very front of our piece, we really want to avoid that. It wasn't really a big deal with these back ones because we're not seeing that finish. So we're gonna do the same thing, just put a thin layer of wood glue on our piece of wood. Gross. Then we put it on. This one's a little harder, like I said, because you're gonna put this piece here. So I personally recommend putting it on this side so that you can see the clean flush edge and you can make sure it's positioned correctly. We're gonna put our clamp here, slide this in between like that. And you could even double it up if you wanna be really careful, which I think I'm gonna be just cause. I'm gonna tighten that okay, and then I'm gonna position this one before I tighten them down both intensely. Now we're just gonna double check that it's all lined up, which you should be able to see if you kept that edge without a towel on it. And we're just gonna tighten it as tight as we can. Now we let it sit for another half hour and then we can mount it on the wall. Next, we're gonna pre-drill our holes so that the wood doesn't split when we put the screw in. Again, you're welcome to try just drilling the screw directly in, but in my experience, that usually ends up splitting wood this thin. The last step is to mount the rack. This can be a lot more helpful if you have a friend. I've already hung one of the racks, so I've already done most of the hard work. Basically, you wanna figure out about where and how high you want your kendama rack. Then I recommend screwing in one side first. Then you can use your leveler to lift it up and down and adjust it based on that. Screw in the last screw and it's all mounted. If you have a light strip, now would be the time to put that baby in there. Then all you gotta do is put the kendamas on. So there you have it, an easy, affordable, do-it-yourself kendama rack that you can customize to look however you want and match your space and your kendamas. I really hope this tutorial helped you out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you do end up making a kendama rack based on this tutorial, share it on your Instagram and tag me at Taylor_tries so I can see it. I love to see all the cool stuff that y'all make. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. I make a lot of content and we always have a good time and it's fun. If you want to go the extra mile, you can become a member of my Otter Club over on Patreon, where you get access to a lot of fun, exclusive content, and it just helps me out for as little as $2 a month. So if you want to do that, there's a link in the description. That's all I have for you today, and I'll see you next time. In fact, I'm gonna move this one in a little bit. No!